if you could quickly take your seat, we'll get started for today. Hello, so, sorry, we're just a few minutes behind schedule, but we'll get trucking. My name's Stacey Wordsworth. I'm President of the Rural Press Club of Queensland. Thank you for coming today. It's wonderful to look out and see such a crowded room, and certainly by the noise just before, it's a room with a lot of energy today, so it's great you could be here. I do begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I also have a very large list of special guests to acknowledge today, including today's guest speaker, Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development and Leader of the Nationals, the Honourable Barnaby Joyce. Warmest welcome to you, Deputy Prime Minister. We're delighted to have you here today, and if this morning's papers are anything to go by, we're delighted that you chose our event to make what will be a significant and important announcement for our industry and for our state. I'll end the spoiler there, but you've probably already read all about it, but thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for making time in your diary for us. We really do appreciate it. Also here today is Minister for Agriculture, the Honourable David Littleproud, Senator Susan McDonald, Senator the Honourable Matt Canavan, Senator the Honourable James McGrath, Assistant Minister for Regional Tourism, Children and Families and Member for Capricornia, the Honourable Michelle Landry is here as well. We also welcome State Member for Gympie, Mr Tony Perrott, and State Member for Callide, Mr Colin Boyce, and former Senator Ron Boswell and the Honourable Larry Anthony have also joined us. So it's almost like there's some sort of significant political event coming up shortly, isn't it? But sincerely, we do thank all of the people from the political sphere who've joined us today. Many of you are regular attendees to our events and strong supporters of our clubs. I'm seeing lots of ties, and it's wonderful that you could be here. As Fran Becker, who stepped in and emceed for me at our last event, would have told you, this is a really important year for the club because we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. It's a really long time. It's a big deal. Our first event had just a handful of attendees. We now regularly have events of this size. There are more than 300 people here today. Some of our big events like the Ekka Breakfast and the Beef Breakfast at Beef Australia attract between 600 and 800 guests. So the club's really come a long way, but this club would certainly not be what it is without the support and the hard work of a lot of people and the donation of what is, I think, our most valuable commodity, and I'm not talking about beef, although it is very valuable at the moment. I'm talking about time. There are a number of people in the room today, including former presidents of the club and committee members who've collectively given many thousands, probably tens of thousands of hours to the club, and these include two of our life members who are here today, Gordon Colley and Jane Milburn. Other life members include, who are not here today, I should add, Brendan Egan, Alan Ernst, Genevieve McCauley, Philip Bate, Chris Walker and the late Bill Kerr as well. Today, I would like to add a name to this important group, and that is former President and well-known agribusiness lawyer Trent Thorne. Trent held presidency between 2016 and 2019, and like all pursuits in his life, including scaling the mountains, the world's great peaks, he certainly ran at the job at full speed and committed to guardianship of this organisation. And it's an organisation that many people in rural journalism and many people in the agribusiness sector do hold very dear to their hearts. I was taking a look at some of the numbers, and under Trent's presidency, he hosted some 7,846 people at Rural Press Club events. This included growing the Ekka Breakfast, as I said, to that 800-person milestone, and he grew the Beef Breakfast to 560 people. It's continued to grow since then. Trent also introduced the SAS group to support our event management capabilities and to lift the professionalism of the club. During that time, he also managed to source speakers, including a range of industry leaders, of thinkers, of innovators. A number of politicians in the room today were speakers under Trent's leadership as well, and Trent and his committee certainly also presented people who inspired and really led the discussion of agribusiness in this state and many times the country. Under his leadership, Trent also raised $12,000 for victims of that horrific flood event in northwest Queensland a few years ago. He inducted Pip Courtney into the Hall of Fame, and perhaps to his greatest achievement, he hosted the Boys from the Batuta Advocate at an event as well. Talking of comedy, one of the true highlights of Trent's presidency, I believe, was the effort he injected into ensuring humour was an ever-present factor in his opening remarks and throughout his MC duties. I don't know how many rehearsals in front of the mirror or how many gags hit the cutting room floor or what the focus group said when you would prep for these events, Trent, but I hate to admit it, you're actually very funny, and humour is not something that I've dabbled in my presidency for fear of very negative comparison. Putting jokes aside though, Trent, your wit and intellect has seen you positioned as a respected and sought-after industry MC, commentator and columnist. You're a board member of AAM Investment Group and the Rural Aid Charity, as well as Beef Australia, and an extremely passionate advocate of industry. I think you're possibly also agriculture's single most prolific user of the social media platform known as Twitter. A lot of tweets come from Trent, as I'm sure you've seen, but the work that you do in that advocacy space, Trent, and in terms of telling our story is extremely important and appreciated. You're not the sort of person that you want to follow these sorts of jobs into. It's not just the great jokes, it's also your laser sharp attention to detail and organisation. And Trent, on top of all of that, you're a nice bloke and a respected member of the agribusiness community. The thing too, I think, that has really pushed us as a committee to give Trent Life membership is the fact that he hasn't been president for going on 3 years now, but today here he was still helping organise tables and get things running. He's up at 4 a.m. helping us set up for Ekka breakfast. At Beef Australia this year, when we arrived at the venue and we had a few things to do, Trent was there and he was running around and fixing things. And he doesn't need to do that, but he continues to because he really does love this club. So with that in mind, I would like to call Gordon Colley and Jane Milburn, as I said, who are existing life members of the club, forward to give Trent, present him with a token of his achievement. Congratulations, Trent.
I think you're pretty funny, Stacey, don't worry about that. Now, I think you're all probably sick of me prattling on over the years, so I will be very brief. Thanks again, Stacey. Thanks the RPC committee. Thanks to the marvellous team at the SAS group, Larry, Malcolm, Lisa, Rachel. You've just been incredible in my tenure, and you're continuing that good work now. Thank you to all of the people who served on committees with me for this honour, and congrats, Stacey, to the club for keeping going over the last 2 years in what has been the most trying of circumstances. We're all extraordinarily grateful again for the opportunity to come and network with our friends and colleagues. Now, I recall from my time on the committee there was about, I think you just mentioned, 8 life members of the club, so I'm just chuffed beyond words to be joining this esteemed group. The first non-journalist, I might hasten to add. However, I will insist on being called Scoop from this time forward, so you've been pre-warned. When I last spoke before the club at the Ekka breakfast in 2019, and I might digress just for a moment, well done, Minister Littleproud, on the $6.5 million to the Ekka this morning. I think we're all got a serious hankering for a Dagwood dog and some fairy floss coming our way. I said that the club is only the club that it is because of the incredible support that we receive from the Queensland agribusiness community. So thank you to all of you for your continued support of the club. If you're looking for me tonight, I think the Town Hall clock might need a do-over, so if you hear a new peal of the bells tomorrow, you can tip your hat to Scoop. And in closing, because I'm now an honorary journalist, I might leave you with a quote from my favourite philosopher, Dr. Phil. If you need a miracle, be a miracle. That's some pretty deep shit from a slow-talking Texan. I have no earthly idea what that means, but I think we can all agree there's a lot of nothing in that for all of us. Thanks and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Scoop. Congratulations again, and thank you to Gordon and Jane as well. As always, we must sincerely thank our home paddock sponsors, McCullough Robertson Lawyers, Colliers Agribusiness and Australian Retirement Trusts formerly known as Sunsuper, for their ongoing support of the club and of Queensland agriculture. We are extremely grateful to them for their ongoing support. We couldn't do what we do without them. If you are tweeting today, which I'm sure Trent will be, you can use the hashtag DPM@RPC. But for now, enjoy your lunch and we'll be back soon.
My name is Fran Becker. I'm an agribusiness lawyer at Hamilton Locke and I am Deputy President of the Rural Press Club of Queensland. Today's guest is no stranger to the RPC stage and certainly no stranger to a battle. From his days fighting for the bush as a banker, turned outspoken national senator, and also coveted as the man who threatened to kick out Johnny Depp's dogs before getting one named after himself. But the dog days are not over for our Deputy Prime Minister, and he is gearing up for what will be one of the biggest fights of his political career. If the polls are anything to go by, the Coalition will have to pull off a miracle come May if they are to return to office. But don't count him out just yet. After all, it was only 9 months ago this guy was a lonely backbencher. On a more serious note, Australia faces a huge decision in 2 months' time, and whoever forms government will have a mammoth task on their hands. Navigating the Ukraine crisis and ongoing tensions closer to home with Beijing, world markets feeling the shocks, sending commodity prices soaring, that pain we are already feeling at the Bowser. And with inflation expected to hit double figures this year, it's no surprise cost of living will be a key election issue. All this added to flood recovery, COVID recovery, and net debt blowing out towards $1 trillion, with no major party showing an appetite for budget reform. So, with a pre-election budget near, some new announcements made today, and before he hits the Wombat Trail, it is with great pleasure that I introduce the Honourable Barnaby Joyce, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. At the start, I'd like to say happy St Patrick's Day and note exhibit number 1, Susan McDonald, dressed brilliantly in green. I'd also like to make a quick word to those who have suffered the privations of the flood and those who have tragically lost their lives or someone close to them. Our thoughts and prayers remain with you. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the reason I have this band-aids on the side is yet another case of skin cancers, minor skin cancers being removed. I'd like to acknowledge the Deputy of the Nationals, the Honourable David Littleproud, Senator Susan McDonald, the very reserved Senator Matt Canavan, a person who was also rather reserved, the former Senator Ron Boswell, Colin Boyce, member for Callide, Michelle Landry, who's around here somewhere, Michelle over there, the member for Capricornia, Larry Anthony, former Member of Parliament, former President of the Nationals, councillors, one and all who are here, and Queenslanders and those visiting this great state. Stacey Wordsworth, obviously, from the Rural Press Club. Thank you for this invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, Winston Churchill once stated he was always ready to learn, although not always did he like being taught. Australia has to become, ladies and gentlemen, as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. Or the future, possibly imminent future, we will be taught the most brutal lesson of our time. Being strong means being able to find what you need and restore the circumstances of your previous position as quickly as possible. It needs the allocation of resources to remove a threat or to repair damage. It needs money, and money in Australia is made from exports. That then rotates around throughout the economy to bring about our GDP, bringing wealth to those in many instances who are oblivious to the source of their income. The value of coal exports, ladies and gentlemen, will reach around about $100 billion this current financial year. Yet some almost have a fear of referring to it. It's almost like the evil eye. Spending the wealth, however, is not a problem for them. And the same people sometimes claim that wealth and claim that largesse as if it had been conjured out of thin air. Gas also comes with the same narrative. The source of this nation's wealth, make no mistake about it, is regional Australia. The mechanism of realising that wealth is getting our valuable commodities like coal, iron ore, gas, cotton, grain to a port and getting it paid for. Resources are what makes that polymer note in your pocket have a value away from just being meaningless plastic. We cannot send to Japan 80 tonnes of coal to buy your new car. We need a value of exchange, and the Australian dollar underpins that value of exchange. But when we decide that we are not going to send coal or not going to send gas, they won't just accept the value of your piece of plastic as exchange for a car. Beyond cars, look at what you are wearing. Think about the phone in your pocket, the fuel in your car, your fridge, your stove, your iPad. Think of all the mechanisms in your house, from your music system to everything you do. Think of how we pay for nuclear submarines. Let's be honest, virtually everything beyond the food on your table there today comes from overseas. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for product to come in on a boat, somebody somewhere must be putting something on a boat and sending it in the other direction. It's called terms of trade. Nothing turns up for charity. Your standard of living is based on those terms of trade. The Nationals and the Liberals are focused on those terms of trade and keeping those terms of trade strong to keep our nation strong. But in our parliament, we have one party, the Greens, that wants to put an end to coal, to gas, live sheep, live cattle, irrigated cotton, irrigated rice, uranium, and the list goes on. The irony is that this is the same group that want more money for social security, more money for subsidised renewables, more money for international aid, more money to finance whatever the issue du jour is. What's concerning is that the Labor Party relies on the Greens and their preferences to form government. Anyone that picks and chooses the products we sell, that others are prepared to buy, or inhibits the process of getting our goods and commodities to a port, makes us weaker, and by doing so, makes us more vulnerable. This may, in some infrequent cases, be a fair price to pay, but if we make it the rule, we are dangerously misreading the geopolitical circumstances so evident on the television or any informed assessment of our part of the world. I want to now give you two examples of what makes us stronger and what makes us weaker. The construction of the Inland Rail makes us stronger. The inertia from almost a Kafkaesque litany of approvals and the layers of bureaucracy to achieve this makes us weaker. An example of the environmental impact study for just one section of the Inland Rail consisted of over 13,000 pages, with 71 scientists, with over 1,000 years of experience from more than 90 universities. Just this section had 2 reviews, reviewed by 2 reviews, reviewed by 2 reviews that then needed another review. Ladies and gentlemen, guess what they've just asked me for? Another review. But what is still going on today is yet this other review. And we've had it before. Stopping dams because of the Burralong frog. Stopping Nathan dams because of the Boggle-Moss snail. Stopping construction of roads because of skinks and wattle. We have to ask ourselves, how do we become as strong as possible, as quickly as possible? Do we have the time? The Inland Rail will make our nation stronger, and I can see Rebecca here, and bureaucracy and delays will make us weaker. The release of new modelling from the CSIRO this week further reinforces why we must drive this project ahead. The modelling shows the Inland Rail could cut freight transport costs by $213 million a year, resulting in huge savings for businesses and industries that use the line, and further driving growth to Goondiwindi, to Narrabri, Parkes, to Toowoomba, to Gladstone, because we will drive it down to Gladstone, and ultimately to this city, to Brisbane, and to Melbourne at the other side. The potential cost reductions cover more than 12,000 supply chains, stretching all the way to Perth and down to Tasmania. 94 commodities, including coal, steel, grains, vehicles, horticulture and livestock. Businesses relying on road-based supply chains will benefit, most from the switch, profiting from the average transport saving of $80.77 per tonne, or $179 million per annum. Savings will only increase as Australia's freight task grows in the future. Our continent, there's another example, our continent, this great nation of ours, has only 2 sealed roads across it. 2 sealed roads. One across the Nullarbor and one going west from Camberwell. This is something that should have been fixed years ago. It is a strategic weakness of our nation. But we are now building the 3rd road from Winton through to Laverton in Western Australia. Once sealed, this outback way will provide an alternate route for heavy vehicles, reducing the round trip between Western Australia and Queensland by 1,600 kilometres. It will reduce travel times for a light vehicle by 19 hours. This makes our nation stronger. This will also assist in opening up new critical mineral precincts north of Alice Springs, as well as gold near Laverton, as well as tourism through Alice Springs, as well as moving cattle on sealed roads. David Littleproud is driving the agricultural visa, which allows us to bring in the labour so we can get the product off the trees on into the port, or out of the abattoirs onto your shelf. He is also expanding the RIC, a nationals policy so many people were cynical about. Now they say it's not big enough. He's helping take agricultural production to over $80 billion a year for the first time in our nation's history. What Minister Pitt is doing is driving the development of critical minerals, mining and processing on the back of the substantial work by Senator Matt Canavan. This is a substantial new horizon for our nation. We are continuing to expand our traditional industries in coal, oil and gas, but also need to build new industries that make our nation and economy stronger. This will create another export industry, critical minerals, in further export dollars, provide jobs and pay for schools, roads and the hospitals we all rely on. Critical minerals are an essential for a range of industries, from your fighter planes to submarines, ventilators to iPhones. Critical minerals will continue to grow. This industry will continue to grow. It is an industry currently dominated overwhelmingly by processing in China. But this will make Australia a viable alternative source. This is an issue the Nationals are happy to stand behind, happy to drive, happy to explain the vision to others in Canberra. Our nation's second biggest export is coal. The price of thermal coal has hit $374 a tonne. Not bad for a product that apparently nobody is using anymore. Not bad for something that people say is going out of fashion, because we are now selling more of it than we've had before. People are pleading with us for that product so that they can sustain their lives in places such as Europe. You can, at the moment, the price of energy over there, you can eat or heat. Take your choice. But you won't be doing both. And that is a very sombre lesson to all of us. Now we have students that are challenging in the court the government's right to approve the expansion of coal mines. If they are looking to their future, maybe they should consider how they will pay for defending our nation from the most egregious forms of regression that may be forced onto us in our lifetime. Will they stand behind their views from Greta Thunberg in her blah, blah, blah oration, which fails to defend the rights and liberties that they are so prominent in expressing by reason of them being there? Will they avail themselves of the process that they have followed by reason of their politically motivated benefactors? A premonition of tragedy. They are precisely at the right age to suffer the outcome of other deadly and overwhelming encumbrances on those liberties that allow them to take their issues to the High Court. The naive belief that adolescent notoriety is a licence against logic from when we look at the appraisals, so self-evident on the facts, on the news every night. We look at what's happening in the Ukraine, and the one thing that comes across so loud and clear is nobody's going to help them. The people of democratic Taiwan are also watching this. Maybe these same students could ask the people of Taiwan what their compass points and priorities are. Those carrying coffins out of Ukraine churches are not focused on climate change, as the aggressor has never made it an item of negotiation of a ceasefire. We can build roads and infrastructure in new areas to deal with more aggressive weather events, and we are doing this. But we can't force China, Russia or Iran to comply with international climate goals. I don't mock their idealism. As you walk up the political hill in life, you are the idealist. But as you walk down the other side, you are the realist. I'm most definitely on the way down the political hill. And as grating as that may be for some, and elated as others might become, the realism is what I must offer you, what I must offer this nation that I have served is reality. On a commercial view, this reality has also changed. Larry Fink, who runs one of the largest investment funds in the world that invests in Origin, AGL, Santos, Woodside, 2 years ago said his fund would take a rigid stance against fossil fuels like coal, but has now softened that position. Writing in his recent annual letter to CEOs of companies he invests in, however, he now argues his fund would not be pursuing immediate divestment as a strategy, saying instead, and I quote, any plan that focuses solely on limiting supply and fails to address demand for hydrocarbons will drive up energy prices for those who can least afford it, resulting in greater polarisation around climate change and eroding progress. A live example of this is what is happening to the price of energy in Europe right now, and this effect is rippling right through to us. On a political view, things have also changed. On the 7th of March this year, in the UK, the home of Glasgow, Boris Johnson has now said he believes the West should be given a climate change pass to help wean the EU off Russian gas supplies as he faces mounting pressure over the government's 2050 net zero target. The Times has been told that Johnson wants the West, particularly US and Canada, to ramp up its own production of gas to help remove the massive leverage that Russia has over EU countries. We have walked into this path by reason of naivety. Now reality is beating us with a stick. Our inertia in bureaucratic red tape has not changed, however, and no one will test that. Today, we have announced that we have put aside the money for Urana Dam. This is the support, apparently, of both the federal and state governments, due to its strategic significance to the regions and to the entire state. The Queensland Labor government confirmed its support for this project at the last state election, but without a funding commitment. So, private enterprise has committed to funding 50% of the bill for construction, and we will fund the federal government the other 50%. In this year's federal budget, the Nationals and the Liberals will lock $483 million in the bank for this project. The Australian government is holding the money aside pending demonstration of value for money and sufficient public benefit for the investment. But surely the Queensland government has already said it's there. They've already said it's there because they support it. Now, the Queensland government have to say what they want to do now. This investment will further drive the development of central Queensland, delivering a 970,000 megalitre dam, twice the size of Sydney Harbour, to open in excess of 20,000 hectares of prime agricultural land, irrigation land, around Collinsville, a town that needs the help. This will help produce such a range of crops, including such things as bananas, lychees, fodder, citrus, macadamias, and the list goes on. Building the dam will support 1,200 jobs during construction and a further 650 ongoing jobs, and also massive wealth coming into that area to support new shops, to support new businesses, to create new opportunities, to further spread the population. If it proceeds, and that is in the lap of the Labor Queensland government, Urana Dam will sit with a suite of dams and water infrastructure that we are building across the nation. $600 million towards Paradise Dam, $183.6 million towards Rookwood Weir, $180 million towards the Hewitton Irrigation Scheme, $30 million towards Big Rocks Weir, and ladies and gentlemen, at the budget there is more to come. Water storage not only underpins mining and agriculture and industry, but also essential domestic requirements. We should be able to plan away from water restrictions. We can do it. With the further water infrastructure, you should be able to wash your car when you want to wash it. You should be able to water your lawn when you want to water it. These things should be able to happen. It's a lack of planning that means that that doesn't happen, and we must fix that. That's the essence of this speech. As an example, ladies and gentlemen, Fairburn Dam, near Emerald, was constructed in the early 1970s. At that time, Emerald had a population of around 2,000 people. Now it has 16,000 people. This is the example. If you want to see public benefit, there it is. Dams make our nation stronger. They drive development that earns export dollars and gives to the Treasury future taxes to help pay for the services that all Australians rely on. From the NDIS to our Defence Force, to pensions, to roads, to health, to education. It becomes the source of wealth. And that's what we need to build, the source of wealth. So let's see how quickly Urana Dam can be approved. Let's hope it does not take as long as other infrastructure such as Rookwood Weir. It does not require state funding. It merely requires state government motivation. It will show whether their actions meet their words. When I speak of the Labor Green Alliance, the Labor Party vehemently denies, well, the actions on Urana Dam will elucidate or otherwise Labor's rhetoric, that they are not in a political alliance with the political philosophy of the Greens, which will come up as the political philosophy of the Greens always does, with a plethora of reasons of why we shouldn't build Urana Dam. They are a nihilist philosophy, that we have gone as far, they believe that we have gone as far as we can go and are responsible for so many ills that the world has, in their view. They have a view that lifting people out of poverty by the wealth we produce is not worth the price. They have a view that beautiful thoughts will defend this nation. Their future world can be seen in a microcosm in the Macedon Council, just north of Melbourne. Macedon Council is now asking farmers to apply for a permit to bring cattle onto their land. You have to apply for a permit to plant a crop. This is apparently to help the Macedon Council reach its climate goal. It's a clarion call as to where this form of socialism by caveat is off to next. Vegetation laws that took away ownership of private assets without payment, and now we have an imposition of a licence on the farm's capacity to earn an income. All in all, excessive caveats are the ingredients to be weak. The Nationals and the LNP are the voice of regional Australia and understand the issues of importance to our communities. The Nationals build things, from dams to cancer clinics, from mobile phone towers to rural medical schools, from building bridges to building compassion for refugees ravaged in other countries and trying to come to our shores. We understand that to build and grow a nation requires industries that produce wealth: agriculture, farming, mining, tourism, small business. The Nationals are united in our fight for ordinary Australians in the regions. We believe that these wealth-producing industries are the key to Australia's ongoing success. All sections of all that we do in this nation must be mindful of the dark cloud of uncertainty that has arrived. Whether this storm passes over is something none of us know. But we hope and pray for sanity, but we must secure the house against uncertainty. Current circumstances must prudently inform our mindset from going forward from this point. Making our nation as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, must be our number one priority in everything we do. This requires not only my commitment to do the task, but the commitment of my colleagues. It also requires your commitment. It requires you to have the courage to say, circumstances have changed. And my ultimate responsibility is to my nation, is that we must evolve with these circumstances to deal with them. The phrase, if only, said in sombre terms, in a lonely future, is not a price this nation can afford. Thank you for your attention.
We do now have some time for questions, so there are a couple of microphones roaming around the room. There's Rachel. If you just want to pop your hand up if you have a question, Rachel will come over and give you the microphone.
congratulate you on a number of your policies, but do you acknowledge that there's a link between selling coal and climate change?
Well, obviously the climate is changing, but I tell you what, as I said, I'm in the position in my career where I'm now the realist. And the biggest threat that is before your children, your grandchildren, climate is definitely an issue. COVID was definitely an issue. The biggest threat before your children is the change of geopolitical circumstances and your grandchildren. That is the one in the imminent future, which the rights and liberties that you are expressing today, be able to express your view. And that's something that's not made up. We can see the demands that China has made on Australia already. If you want to protect your capacity to determine who comes into your country, the investment that comes in, what you can say, where you can go, then you must be strong. And the reality is that if China and Russia and Iran and other countries don't play to the game of, or to the process of reducing carbon emissions, then everything Australia will do will be ineffectual. But if we make ourselves weak, if we're unable to defend ourselves, and we can only defend ourselves if we can pay for that, if we can't do that, then that is the greatest blight that you'll ever have on those who come after you.
Barnaby Joyce, thank you very much for your address. It was terrific. The floods have been horrific in northern New South Wales. Is there any chance that the federal government will extend flood relief to the entire area of northern New South Wales?
Well, yes, and I'd like to, obviously I went down to Lismore the other day with my staff, and just going into houses, helping them clean out, is to see people's lives basically thrown out on the lawn, to see their wedding photos thrown out on the lawn, their photo albums thrown out on the lawn, to see the paintings that the kids painted thrown out on the lawn. It's devastating. This in Lismore, 2.2 metres above the record last flood. How do you plan for that? How do you know about that? But the process is always in play. We have to understand that the process, the federal government will always be the willing partner with the state government. The process of relief is asked for by council, endorsed by the state, and then half funded by the federal government. And if we have states, we have to have a process and a reason for states to be there, beyond just closing borders. And this is something that they need to do. So if the states come forward with further requests, then of course they'll be very welcomely pursued, and we're doing that. And there are other things that are in the preliminary investigations from the NRRA as we speak, but I'm not going to start being a sort of precursor for the role of Senator Bridget McKenzie.
Good afternoon, Deputy Prime Minister. Adrian O'Haney, representing Heart of Australia Mobile Specialist Medical Clinics going around regional rural Queensland. With regards to your announcement today about dams, you've got a budget to get through in a couple of weeks, and then you've got to win an election. Can you start giving some timings as to when Australians, particularly Queenslanders, will see dams come online?
Well, if I had the authority, they would start tomorrow. One of my greatest frustrations in politics is, as I said, this Kafkaesque imbroglio, which is approvals for infrastructure projects. We see it because if we actually took a bulldozer out to Urana and started it, we would get arrested. We would literally get arrested. And we've seen it, I must admit, it's not just in this state. It's also Dungowan Dam not far from me, where once more, what have they asked for? Another review. And this is just a stalling tactic. So how quickly can it happen is the question you ask. It can happen as quickly as the state government wants to make it happen. And it's one of the formative things that drove my interest in politics, and some people dislike him intensely, others believe that one of the best things was Bjelke Petersen, because he made things happen. He made things happen. And from that date, it's become this sort of stymied, slow, cumbersome, stumbling process. So I want our nation to change. And we have got to change. We have got to. We don't have time. That is not something that we can control. And we are seeing what's happening, we are seeing what's happening on the television. And we do know what is happening. We know the statements that are happening around Taiwan. You know, we're sentient beings. And the only way we can deal with that is to be strong. And the only way you become strong is to create wealth. And you can't just conjure it up and wish it was there. You actually have to take the actions to bring it about. And this is something that state governments have to understand. The Labor Party has to understand. We have to understand. Councils have got to understand that we just don't have the time to wait. We've got to go, go, go. We've got to move.
Prime Minister Chick Olsen, Australian Walker, I just want to congratulate you on a great speech, and particularly great to see David look proud here today. We've had a golden period the last year, record exports for all our agricultural products, and we should be tremendously proud of our nation. Some of the things that are holding us up, I see David was talking about, which is we're getting our skilled shearers here and make if we get an update on the possibility of getting our skilled shearers and shed hands back into Australia or shear a sheep, please.
I don't know whether you want me to flick it to David. But I'll just say on behalf of David, the ag visa is something that was sitting in abeyance for a while, and we picked it up and drove that forward. I must say, we got a bit of pushback. But our job at the table is to express your views. And the views of people from regional areas are decidedly different to the views of people who rightly hold them, but they just don't see it in urban areas. And it's not just the wool industry, it's also, we can't find people to pack offal in abattoirs. Australians just don't want to do it. They don't want to pick fruit. The ones who want to work are working, and they do very well, and they've gone up. But the jobs that need to happen for us to have an abattoir working, to have a crop taken off, to have fruit picked, to have sheep shorn, these jobs, in many instances, are hard to come by. I remember the last sheep I saw, the bloke who's beside me gave me his pocket knife and said, "Do you want to finish the job off?" But growing up in the country, we all that was basically what you did. You started in sheds and you shore them, and now it's hard to find shearers. They just don't want to work. I mean, that's something also we've got to deal with. David and I, and Michelle and Susan, we've got to really have a hard look at it and say, if there is work about, like shearing, like mustering, like working in an abattoir, and you're physically capable and of the right age, then you're not unemployed, you're lazy. And why does the taxpayer have to pay for lazy people? And this is because you all go to work. You work all of Monday and most of Tuesday till around about 11 o'clock just to pay your taxes. Each one of those, if you're an accountant, each one of those clients you did it for the taxation department. If you're a shearer, each one of those sheep you pulled out of a pen and knocked the fluff off, you did it for the taxation department till around about 11 o'clock on Tuesday. If you're laying bricks, each one of those bricks you laid till around about 11 o'clock on Tuesday, you did for the taxation department. And then you start working for yourself. And those people who are laying bricks, shearing sheep, doing accounts, solicitors' clients, writing stories Monday to 11 o'clock on Tuesday, ask the question, I don't want to work in this paper for longer than I have to before I start working for myself. I don't want to pull out sheep for longer than I have to before I start doing it for myself. I don't want to lay bricks longer than I have to before I start doing it for myself. And every time someone decides they don't want to go to work, someone else goes to work for them.
Barnaby Joyce, appreciate your comments on making us strong again and so forth. I guess recently we've seen a couple of instances where the transport industry's nearly stopped from the back of that blue and diesel. Nearly all our refineries have shut. I think there's one that's running. our strategic reserves, I believe, are held in the US, not in Australia. I think that's
Yep.
correct. And Australia's American, Queensland's American gas producers, they were told we were building a new plant in Western Australia, but they're very exposed there now. Is there anything the government can do to increase our safety, our stability, and our it's in these critical areas, as critical as anything else?
Yes, and one of the issues that when the Nationals were negotiating the 2050 agreement, we made sure that we had money put aside to deal with some of these issues, and they'll become more evident as we go through the budget process. I want to commend a lot of my colleagues because we had to. It was a tough time. As I said, the coalition's a business arrangement. It's not a marriage, and we make sure that within that business arrangement that we secure things. And right now, Minister Taylor is also making sure we secure our capacity, especially in ammonia and also in fertiliser. So we deal it. And I'm not going to preempt what's in the budget, but I also have been making sure that in the money that the Nationals negotiated, that we have the capacity to further deal with that issue. It is so, ladies and gentlemen, with new European diesel engines in trucks, they need AdBlue. But we're closing down our capacity for climate reasons to make AdBlue. And that means that if you don't have AdBlue, the trucks stop. And the trucks stop, there's no groceries go onto your shelf. You will go hungry. So we have to keep those trucks moving. And where did our AdBlue come from? China. So you don't have to be Pythagoras to work out what you've got to do next. So these are the issues that are before us. And we have so many vulnerabilities in sovereignty, and some of them became evident during COVID. But now, more than ever, especially with the manufacturing initiative, we're trying to make sure that we deal with it. Can I just close on one thing? Yeah, we've got 2 refineries left in Australia. 2. You're pretty vulnerable. 2 refineries. There's a thing called the safeguard mechanism, which is going to come about to reduce emissions. A number of companies are going to get taxed. Guess how many of those refineries are going to have new taxes put on them? Both of them. So if you're trying to keep refining capacity here, I'll give you a tip. Don't tax it.
Barnaby, Mark Phelps from Queensland Country Life. You made note of the number of reviews, particularly for inland rail, and the role that bureaucracies play in slowing down projects. But it's always a politician that agrees to the review, and certainly in the case of inland rail, it's often been a federal politician. Now, with Urana ban, of course it's going to be subject to massive environmental scrutiny. And part of that will be the environmental biodiversity conservation. Can you quarantine that project from that scrutiny? Because it's certainly create major losses.
We're currently in the process, Minister Pitt and Susan Lee, of amending the EPBC Act to make it more workable. Yes, the EPBC Act was brought about to get the Democrats' vote to bring in the GST. So it was a political payment. It was not a very cognizant piece of legislation in the circumstances that we are now in. Items of critical infrastructure do have a capacity to streamline and go around, but that's a call for the states, and we don't call for review. The legislation demands reviews that we have to follow. To fix that, we have to amend the legislation. And what happens, of course, as soon as we go to amend the legislation, it goes to this mythical body in the sky called the Senate, and there all manner of things can happen, and of course people line up and say, this is going to bring sort of the end of the planet as we know it. It doesn't. So our mechanism of changing what is demanded of us is not as easy as we think, and this is part of the reason of this speech, to try and drive that agenda.
Deputy Prime Minister, Mike Burham from Agforce. Just a question about education, accepting the state's role in it. Queensland's the largest agricultural state in Australia, and we had 4 pastoral colleges a few years ago. Unfortunately, we're down to none. Just really interested in your comments about education and pathways for young people in one of Australia's proudest industries.
Yeah, absolutely. Longreach, Dalby, Emerald, these used to be part of the fabric of what Queensland was. And this is where you've got to invest to be the best, to avail yourself of the best opportunities to develop your agricultural industry. And there's something I find wrong about it. Agriculture, what does it do? It doesn't exploit a person's weakness. It's not like alcohol or gambling or anything else, or exploit a person's ego like a flash red car. It feeds and clothes people, the most fundamental aspect of a person's life. Agriculture is an honourable occupation. It feeds people and clothes people. In a world where right now 30% of the population of the globe does not have enough to eat. The last time I looked, over 160 million people are starving. That means they've had nothing to eat today, nothing to eat yesterday. And we have a job, because we can't fix it, but we have a job to add to the solution, to be part of the solution, to add to the food stack. In the last report, we are seeing that the litmus test, the canary in the coal mine for starvation, you will see, we've got the massive wheat exports that are required for Egypt. Remember, 30% of the world's grain, wheat and barley, comes out of the Ukraine and the western part of Russia. Now that's not going to be on the market. So people in Kenya, in Eritrea, in Somalia, in Kazakhstan, in Guatemala, they will be the people who run out of food, because they eat from the bottom of the stack. Today, you ate from the top of the stack. You ate from the top. These people eat from the bottom, but if too much goes out of the top, they don't eat at the bottom. And our job, because we can't feed them all, but we must add to that food stack, and we must be doing everything we can to add to that food stack. That's why, one of the reasons we build dams. And one of the people to work on the land have to be trained in the land. And if we remove agricultural colleges, then we remove our capacity to do that noble cause of adding to the capacity of a globe being able to feed itself. Our green revolution, which happened 1947, 1948, fertilisers, genetic changes in grains. Unfortunately, the population of the world has now gone to a point where we've used that up. Now as we head towards 10 billion people, a massive gap is opening up again. Massive protein gap, fats gap, carbo gap. And uncertainties, wars exacerbate these situations almost overnight. Ag colleges are a part of the solution, and yes, I'm sure if you get an LNP government in, then it's one of the first things they'll address.
Barnaby, how you going?
Not bad.
I'm Tom Hasselman, good to see you.
Good. This is Philip Kelly from Inverell.
Thanks, mate. Also from Collier's Ag Business, very proud sponsors of the event. Barnaby, you touched in your speech and in a couple of answers some of the roadblocks about development in the country, local government, state government and the federal government. You sort of almost got to some solutions, but as the Deputy Prime Minister and Leader of the Nationals and someone in power in that leadership role, what is the solution to those roadblocks?
First, you lay down the challenges we did today with the Urana Dam, where you say, there's the money, you show us how quickly you can build it. Part of the solution is, unfortunately, what's the role of politics? It's to convince people that they have to change. That's one of the first things. Inform people and convince them of the change. So one of the first parts is exactly what I'm doing here, Phil. They're saying, and I know as I walk out that door, some of you will say, what he said made sense and I agree or I've changed, and some of you will say, as soon as that person falls off a perch, the Australia will be a better place. That's politics. That's politics. That's politics. And my job is to, especially as I say, at the realest time of my career, is to be ruthless and drive agendas. And that is review of the EPBC Act, and that is making sure we get ag visas through, and that's making sure that we build dams, railway lines, roads. Our nation is changing, Phil. Who would have thought a few years ago? I'll give you one example. And I'm going to test something. So, who would have thought 10 years ago that Australians would go towards nuclear submarines and no one would even blink? No one blinked. It's just, the only question we got was, why didn't you do that before? And I'll show you a change in perception. Let's see how this goes. Who in this room believes Australia should have nuclear power? Just put your hand up. Look at that. You know what they tell us? The polling says that's not the case. What a load of rubbish.
Barnaby Joyce reporting from the
Yep.
I just wondered, you mentioned shortage of abattoir workers, and these are good help solve that problem. How do you think countries that would sign up for the abattoir workers in those countries will be looking at how the Pacific workers and backpackers have been treated and go, I don't want to go and work there?
Sure.
A message for any rural employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we use labour hire companies, because every year we hear stories, they say, it's just an isolated example. There's only so many years you can still act and still claim that. So any messages to employees?
Yeah, absolutely.
ASEAN countries about
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you at the end. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. The reason I'm so enthusiastic to jump in there is we must treat all human beings with the dignity that they deserve. There is not a differentiation between one person working in a paddock and another person working in a paddock. They must be paid the same amount. They must be treated with dignity. They must be given the capacity to sleep in a bed and to be able to get a meal and to live with some sense of security. And there are labour hire firms which have been disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. And by so doing, they make it so hard to get things through, like ag visas and other issues, because they create the example for others to use and say, but look what they do. So we need labour in the world is now moving, and it's not moving by reason of some sort of patriarchy or some sort of defilement of people's dignity. It moves because it wants to move. People want to work. They want it from the Philippines. They want to come here to work because their money is worth a lot more back in the Philippines. From other areas, they go from Mexico. From other areas, they go from Eastern Europe. It's what happens. It's what happens in a global economy now. And we've got to make sure we're part of it. But we've got to be part of it on fair and decent terms. Fair and decent terms. And labour hire companies who go out and exploit people need to be hauled over the coals.
Barnaby Chief Hewitt on the road from Knowledge. We've heard a fair bit in the media, and justifiably so, about the impact on increased fuel prices in all of us. The primary producers, the thing that's probably going to impact us substantially more than that is what's happening to fertiliser prices, and specifically nitrogen.
Yeah.
Right at the moment, we're looking at anhydrous ammonia prices of $2,300 a tonne, where 12 or 18 months ago they were around about 1,000. So we're well over a 200% increase. If that's not bad enough, we've also got an announcement from our only supplier of that product, Pivot, that they are closing the producing facility in Brisbane late this year. That forces us as primary producers into purchasing imported urea, the only source of nitrogen. That can't be a good outcome for Australia. It certainly isn't a good outcome for us as primary producers. And the reason that it's closing this damn thing is because they can't get affordable gas. And we have the largest gas suppliers in the world. There's got to be something fundamentally wrong there, and I'm interested in what the government's position is on this and whether something can be done to try and resuscitate this thing before it's getting wrong.
Yeah, sure. Okay, there's a whole range of questions. You should actually work for the press club. He's just made you ask 7 questions. So let's go with gas. The way gas is exported is as it fit. If it goes onto trains, it's how you export gas onto trains, being your capacity to load it onto ships. It goes on a global parity price. It's a global product. But what can't go on to that ship has to go back into domestic market. Our gas actually domestically is much cheaper, much cheaper than what you pay for it overseas. Now, to get the issue of sovereignty, you're dead right. I think New Farm is probably one of the only companies that's going to be left producing ammonia. It's for working where you are, and I'm very aware of that. And in our 2050 negotiations that the Nationals did, we were very aware of that. And we're going to try and, we are working in that space to try and make sure that we deal with this sovereign issue. Because without fertiliser, you don't have yield. Without yield, you get less per acre. If you get less per acre, you're producing less food. If the world produces less food, people starve to death. And that's a fact. Just how it works. And so, and the final part, gas. So we have to get access to gas. If every time we come up with a new area where there's gas, we say we can't do it, or come up with another reason you can't do it, you're not going to have access to gas. What we have to do is make sure that the partnership between the farmer and the company is one that is profitable for the farmer, very profitable for the farmer. We have to make sure, obviously, that it doesn't destroy aquifers. That's an obvious area. But arbitrary no's, and where it all becomes too difficult, where you can't do it, that's your problem. If you just want to say no, you're going to become weaker. And fertiliser is just one mechanism. People think, you're just talking about weaker, you're talking about your defence force. No, weaker means across the board. Weaker means in everything, including your capacity to pay for hospitals. That's what weaker means.
G'day, Barnaby Joyce MP from Queensland Countrywide.
Formerly from the Tamworth Northern Data Leader.
Still around Parliament, so it's
Yep.
great to be here to understand with me. Got a Murray Darling Basin plan question for you.
Yep.
So the next government in charge, they'll be in charge of overseeing the Murray Darling Basin plan.
Mm-hmm.
The government's committed to both not doing water buybacks but delivering the plan in full. What's the plan? There's been several reports that have indicated it's not likely that the water target's going to be met in time. And the government and Victorian
You're
government
right. Sorry,
had the
excuse
same
me.
thing.
Sorry, you're right.
So it's unlikely that the water target,
You're right.
the water target recovery targets will be hit in time. What is the plan when the plan ends, the targets haven't been hit, but you're not going to do buybacks?
Well, once you do I don't support buybacks. 100% don't. Because buybacks, what happens with buybacks, ladies and gentlemen, is when they go in, they buy the water licence of an area. So I'll tell you what happens. So you go to St George, you buy the licences, and good luck to them. Farmer sells up, goes to the coast, buys a beautiful place at the Gold Coast. Done. But the hairdresser's not bought out, the Thai business is not bought out, and the people in the town are not bought out. They all stay behind. And so their economy is decimated when you buy out water licences. Because the only people who are bought out are the people who own the licences, but the people who move there to set up St George, to set up Dirranbandi, to underpin the wealth of Gundawindi, they don't get paid out. And so it's not the simple equation that people sometimes think it is. And we at a federal level, I'm looking down at David, some time ago we passed legislation that we wouldn't buy back over 1,500. So we'd have to change the legislation. The reason we drove that agenda is we look after the people, we always say, we look after people in the weatherboard 9, and they're the people who are left behind. They're the people who don't go anywhere. We've got to make sure that we don't decimate the economies of Shepparton. We don't decimate the economies of Moree. That we've got to make sure that these people are looked after. And they're looked after because their economy is based on irrigation. No irrigation, no wages, no wealth, no reason for a shop to be there, no reason for a doctor to be there, no reason for a school, in some instances, to be there. You've got the complete social, reconfiguration to a lesser state when you take the water out of an area. So we've got to, and this is another one where people say, you've got to buy back the water licences because that's the best outcome. You've got to have and best environmental outcome. You've got to bounce us up to the best outcome for people as well. They're also part of the equation and must be taken on board.
Michael from Ironlinks. We're an Australian pipeline manufacturer for about the past 80 years in Australia. So the last part of our history has been building water security for communities and indeed the agriculture industry. I'm just interested, and congratulations on your announcement about the ban. I'm just interested to see, just one of the frustrations that we have is seeing water infrastructure staying on the planning list and
staying at the feasibility stage and not getting through to sort of actually being built. So I was just wondering, is there a position for the private sector to be looking at funding some of this and joining government and make some of this come to fruition, or is it, I just understand your government's position on that.
I think, it was suggested to me by people from Infrastructure Australia came up with an idea that what you should do is you should say, since the approval is predominantly in the realm of the state, you should say to the states, you pay for all the approvals. If you want something done, we'll come in when you start moving dirt, but all your approvals, all your studies, all your money that goes to KPMG and Deloitte and Ernst & Young, all that money, you pay for it, not us. And I bet you get a lot less approvals then.
Just one more quick one, I believe. Oh, that was you saying you want.
Sam works for me, and if he asks the question, then he won't be by the time we get that door. Okay, thank you.
Sam, we were on the same page with the one where yeah, excellent. Look, thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. I will invite Mark Phelps, our Royal Press Committee Club member, or one of, to move the official vote of thanks.
Thank you, Stacey. Barnaby, thanks again for a great address. You've been a guest at the Royal Press Club before, and we always treasure your appearances, and will always be welcome back again. Certainly an interesting address, and I think, as always, some controversy. We certainly have a climate change happening, and I think that is part of strengthening Australia. Unless we address our change in climate, we're going nowhere. But as a gift from our club, we have a traditional bottle of Clovelly Estate wine. Oops, and a lovely Rural Press Club tie.
Thank you again, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you to everyone who's come along today. Thank you to Rachel and the team at the SAS Group for their ongoing support in event management for us. A big thanks, as always, to our sponsors, McCullough Robertson Lawyers, Australian Retirement Trust, and Colliers Agribusiness. And thank you to the Pullman for hosting us again this month. We'll have our invite going out on our next event, our April event, the next few days. So keep an eye out for that one. But for now, thanks again for coming, and we'll see you again next time at the Rural Press Club. Thank you.